Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Fusion 360 live stream. I'm Jason Lichtman, and I'm going to be your host for today, and you have Bryce Heaventhal on the keyboard. Today's March 19th, 2020, and you'll notice that we are working from a different place than usual. As many of you know, the world is a very different place today than it was just a few weeks ago, and so all Autodesk employees are working from home, myself included. Lucky for me, I'm surrounded by some pretty cool toys. I've got a laser, I've got a CNC machine, I've got a leather sewing machine, and I have Fusion 360. Today's topic is going to be really fun. Today's topic is base features. All about that base feature. I'm mostly joking, but really what it comes down to is we have a lot of features in Fusion 360 that not a lot of people know about, and base feature is a great example of that. Now, you've probably seen that icon that says create a base feature and had no idea what it does or why anyone would use it. So this particular live stream is going to be exactly for you. It's going to tell you exactly what base features are, why they exist, how to use them, and some ways you could use them you might not have expected or thought of. So let's jump right into the live stream, or well, to the screen share part of the live stream, and we'll get into it. So here you could see Fusion 360, and we are going to be working with this Trail 450 today. And the base feature that we talked about, that icon, you can usually find it under Create, and then scroll down here, Base Feature. And you'll notice that it says here that it enters direct editing mode and inserts a history-free feature in your timeline. Any action performed while in that base feature is not going to be recorded in that timeline. And that's kind of a weird concept. So before I actually dive into using that base feature, let's talk a little bit about history versus no history. Now, history is essentially parametric modeling, the step-by-step instructions that your software is going to use to be able to create whatever it is you want to make. An example of that, let's actually zoom in here. You could see I have a hub for this front wheel, and let's jump into the actual file for it. And here you could see at the very bottom of my screen what we call the timeline. And I have all these different steps or recipe steps, really, to be able to make this thing. I have a sketch that I end up revolving, another sketch that I end up extruding. I created a pattern so that I could create that shape on the very front end, some chamfers, actually fillets, then chamfers, more sketches, and it just continues. Now, when you have a file like this and you want to make a change, it's as simple as going into one of those sketches or one of those features, editing the sketch or editing the feature, change a dimension, hit the finish button. Actually, let's do that real quick. Actually, we'll just hit finish, and then it'll update the model just like instant, really quick. But when you bring in models from other places, you're not always going to get that history. So an example, same file, this time show you what it would look like if it were imported. It looks exactly the same, but there's no timeline at the bottom. There's no history. And to people that come from other software that is like only parametric, this is kind of like a crazy concept. It doesn't make any sense to them. Why would you not have any history? Well, the reason is because you can actually make changes to that file really quickly and easily, even without that history. So if I wanted to make this file itself, like this front wheel hub, longer, I could use, for example, the move command. I just hit M on my keyboard. Make sure this is set to faces. Select all the faces that are on the back in this case, and then drag this arrow over to the right. And in this case, it's adding an extra 2.5 inches to the length of the part. Right? Something like that. It doesn't have to be as exaggerated, of course, but you can make some really quick and easy changes to your model without the history on. But remember that you can actually switch back and forth between history or no history anytime you want. So let's actually undo that change. I can go and right click at the very top over here where it says Wheel Hub. This is called the root level in Fusion. If you'd like to nerd out with me just a little bit, you can right click there and say Capture Design History. And it's actually going to turn the history of this model on. But just keep in mind, it's only going to record the history from this point forward. It's not going to just magically make history that doesn't exist. Now, there is a second way to turn on the history. I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Let me hit undo to go back to where we were. You can also go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and there should be a little gear. Let me actually make this bigger. Oh, for some reason it is missing right now on my screen, but there's a little gear in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you click that little gear, there's another option to turn on the history as well. So there are two ways to do that. Now, remember that these are two totally different approaches to designing, having the history or not having the history. But the cool thing about what a base feature is that it's a hybrid between the two different worlds. So I want you to think of this like solid modeling versus surface modeling. Most people start off designing using solid modeling. Some people, usually more advanced users, will end up surface modeling quite a bit of their design, but it's not really solid modeling or surface modeling. It could be both. You could design something using solid modeling, use surfaces to be able to augment or supplement whatever you're trying to do. Use that surface to maybe do a split body command to the solid, right? And then move on and continue doing other solid modeling techniques. So it can be a hybrid of solid and surface modeling, just like it could be a hybrid of history modeling or parametric modeling versus no history modeling, which is also called direct editing or direct modeling. So you guys just learned a whole lot of terms right there. But this hybrid, this base feature, allows you to be able to bridge both worlds really well. So let me give you an example. Here we have this imported wheel hub, and I'm going to go and turn the history on for a moment. So I go to the top left corner, right click, and say capture my design history, just like I did before. My timeline shows up at the very bottom of my screen, but that timeline always, in this case, because I have a body or an object in my model, starts off with this icon here, and if you hover over it, it says base feature 1. So without even knowing it, when I turn the history on, I actually automatically created a base feature. And what that base feature really is kind of like a folder for objects that you want to put in it that don't have any history. And I can go into that folder and make changes if I want to, or go out of that folder and make history changes. So let's give us an example here. Right now I have the history turned on, and if I want to go and make, let's say, the hole or the shaft of this part bigger and be able to have the history, so it's editable, of that change, all I'd have to do is use, let's say, a press pull command, choose this face, and if you want the history, even in the history mode, you have to change this from automatic to new offset. And I could change this blue arrow, drag it whichever way I want. When I hit OK, I wind up with a feature here. In this case, it's the offset face command. And I can always go back and edit this and change it to some other value, whatever it is I want it to be. Now I can keep doing this as many times as I want. So if I wanted some sort of keyhole, I can also come in here, right click and say create a sketch. I can draw a quick center line, a vertical one, just like that. Then I'll also go and draw a quick keyway, and maybe I'll set this point right here to be the midpoint of the bottom line, and we'll make that construction as well. Pick some sort of dimension for my keyway. Maybe that's pretty big. 0.125 is probably great. And then I'll also pick some sort of gap here. And then now we can go and extrude this as well. So let's zoom out a little bit, extrude this through the model. And I'd like to change this to all the way through. So this way it always updates. And now I have a keyway. And remember, I've been doing all of this with the history. So you could see here I have the offset face command, I have the sketch for the keyway, and then I have the extrude for the keyway as well. But what if I want to make some changes to the original model before I ever even made the keyway? Well, we all know that with parametric modeling, you can actually go back in time. So I have this timeline vertical bar here. I could drag the bar before I made all those other features, and then I could actually create another feature in and of itself to modify the part. So as an example, if I wanted to make this part longer, I could use that move face command, just like I did earlier. Select this back half. I can extend this, maybe we'll just go like an inch, something like that, and hit OK. And then I can roll the history to the very end, and I'll have all the rest of the features update. So that keyway is still there, and because that keyway was set to all the way through the model, even when the model got longer, it updated and everything looks great. But what if I don't care about the history of that change I just made? What if I really don't care about it at all? All I want is the keyway because I'm probably going to have to change the keyway from part to part or product to product. and the material or like the geometry I'm starting with is just doesn't really matter all that much. Well, then there's another approach you can use to be able to change that model and not keep the history. So let's go and show you that. First of all, let me get rid of that move command. I'll just go and select it and delete it. Now I'm back to where I was a moment ago. Again, remember that I have this feature here called a base feature. And I told you from the very beginning that that base feature is a way to kind of have a hybrid between those two worlds. And I also told you that it's like a folder. And when you enter that folder, anything you do there is not recorded. So if I right click on this base feature and I say edit, now I'm in this base feature environment or island. Some people like to call it an island. And I still have all my features available here. You'll see under the solid modeling, I have create, a whole bunch of solid modeling features. I have a whole bunch of modifiers. I have the same thing for surface, but you will notice that it says here base feature solid and base feature surface. And it also says here finish base feature. This is kind of similar to when you're in the mesh environment and you have like mesh specific tools, or when you're in the form environment and you have form specific tools. And when you exit, then you go back into that normal parametric environment. This is exactly what we have here. So I can still go and use that move copy command just like I did before. I'm going to go and select faces. It's already selected actually. Select the faces I want, drag this back. We'll call it an inch and hit OK. And now it changed the geometry. And when I hit finish, I wind up with exactly this finished geometry before I created my offset, before I created my sketch for the keyway or the extrude for the keyway. But there is no feature to actually edit to be able to change that 1 inch to half an inch or 3 inches or whatever it is. Now, that might seem like a negative, but actually it's not. There are a lot of positive reasons why you might want to edit an object and not keep the history. So as an example, maybe you import a file from a vendor and you just need to be able to get rid of a logo or make the thing a little longer or change the wall thickness. You can just go and edit that base feature and make all those changes and not have to worry about the exact amount you offset and having it be editable because you're not going to ever edit it again. And don't forget that we have version management as part of Fusion. So if you ever decided later that you really did want to go and change one of those features, you could always go back and grab an old version anyway. But this base feature is a great way to be able to have a mix of both parametric modeling and no history or direct editing, direct modeling as well. You get both. Now, I just want to repeat again that when you bring in a model from some other software like SolidWorks, Creo, Inventor, you name it, whenever it comes in without that history, and it comes in not only without the history, it comes in with the history turned off by default. You can actually change that if you want to. So when you go to your name in the top right corner and you go to preferences, there is a preference here for when you create a new file, whether you're going to have that history turned on automatically. I believe it's under general and then design. And then here you could see design history, capture design history is turned on for me. You could also change that or even make it so it prompts you every time. All right, so just know that that's available to you as well. So just again to repeat, you bring in a model, you turn the history on, and you have the base feature automatically from the beginning. Now the same is also true for assemblies. So let's go look at an example. Here I have the front wheel assembly. This includes that wheel hub that we just looked at. You can see it right here, as well as quite a few other components. If we look at the structure of this file, it turns out it has a subassembly called wheels, a subassembly called brake pad, I guess. And if I look at this wheel subassembly, wow, there's a lot of different components in here, a lot of them. And if we scroll down even further under brake pad, it turns out there are actually a couple of bodies, and then there are also quite a few different components as well. So now I'm going to show you the same thing, but it's going to look a little different than when it was just one body. It's going to look just, now we have an assembly, so of course it's going to look different. So let's go to the root level, the very top here, right click and say capture design history. It's going to do exactly the same thing as before, but I'm now going to get a little bit more information than I had earlier. First of all, it groups everything that it did into a folder. We call them groups in Fusion 360. If I hit this plus sign at the bottom, it expands that group. And now I see a lot of those base feature icons, but I also see a lot of these white square icons. And if any of you haven't seen those before, this icon means that it's a creation of a component, right? So every time you create a component, like that hierarchy of you have assembly and then you have a subcomponent, then you have another component under it, or you have a subassembly, all of those different levels, every time there's a different level, you'll get one of these white things, this white icon that says that this is creating a new component. There's no geometry in there, right? It's just saying this is creating the hierarchy. So for the geometry, it actually brings in that base feature. So let's go and I'll actually I'll go back in time here a little bit, all the way, let's say around here. Actually, let's go way further back. It'll simplify this model quite a bit. It'll make this easier for us. Let's say around here. So this is the very first base feature. What you'll see here is the first icon is creating this wheels subassembly. The second icon is creating this front wheel subassembly. The third icon here is creating this wheel rim component. And then within that, the base feature is actually creating the geometry for that particular wheel, or the rim in this case. So if you scroll through this history, that's exactly what's happening over and over and over again for all of the structure that's in here. Now, I do have a tip later that I'm going to show you guys for being able to clean up the structure, but just know that when you turn something from the no history to turning on the history, you'll automatically get the structure. Now, if you want to go and actually, let's scroll all the way to the very end. There we go. So now we're at the very end. We have all of our components. Just like with the last part that I showed you where it was just one body, you can create new history at the end of your timeline any moment you want. So I can go and create a new sketch and I can extrude cut through my models. Actually, I'll just give you a quick example of that. Let's go and create a quick sketch here. I'll go and draw, actually let's project this circle so I can line up my new circle perfectly. I'll go and draw a new circle that'll be way bigger on purpose, just so you could see. And we're going to extrude cut all the way through our model, just like that. We'll change that to all and hit OK. And now I have another cut through my hub, something like that. Now the key here is that I just created a sketch. It's at the very, oh, you can't see that. Hold on one moment. Give me a second, I can fix this. There we go. Okay, so in the very bottom right-hand corner, you could see I have a sketch of the circle, and then I have the extrude of that cutout. And this is, again, in my timeline. But if I didn't want that history, I just wanted to be able to make that hole in that particular part without the history, I can still do that. The key is identifying which of those base features is the one you need to edit. Because you saw on my screen, and you could still see it now, I have lots of different base features. There's a different base feature for each of your components, right? Or each of your objects or bodies. They all have a base feature. So the way that I like to do this is I like to select the object itself that I want to edit, and I look in my timeline to see what ended up getting highlighted. And I hope you guys can see that. It's a little small, but this icon right over here, this base feature just highlighted, and this icon here just highlighted. And that's telling me that this icon is creating this component that I selected. And then the base feature to the right of it is actually is responsible for the geometry that came in for that particular component. So if I do want to edit that same thing without the history, well, first of all, let's get rid of our sketch and our extrude. Done, those are gone. Let's select our component again. Let's select the base feature itself that's responsible for it. Right click and say edit. And now I'm in that just like before, I'm in that base feature island or zone where I can make any change I want and the history is not going to be recorded. So I can even go and create sketches, by the way. This isn't just for direct modeling, the traditional method. I can also go and use sketches and do the same thing. So let's go and do that. Here I have a quick extrude, and I suppose I can't see that sketch. Let's go and find that sketch here, and we'll extrude all the way through it. There we go. Perfect. So now I have the same thing. Again, I hit finish base feature, and now I don't have the history of that change. So really quick and easy. I don't have to worry about my history. Now, there are plenty of other ways or reasons you might want to get rid of the history. Maybe you've actually already designed something that has a huge amount of parametric features, and you realize that something about the way you designed it isn't very robust. And if you make a change to a sketch, it actually blows up your model. That is a big problem, right? Because the whole point of parametric modeling is that those sketches and those features help you to be able to make changes to your model easily. But if for whatever reason, maybe your model's too complex, or maybe, and I mean this in the nicest of ways, but maybe the design method you used just isn't the best choice, which is possible. I make mistakes too, by the way. If you design something in a way that's like super meandering and like not very linear, and you have to actually be cautious that your model's going to blow up on you because you make a change and it just cascade blows up everything, you might want to consider getting rid of that history. And there are a couple of ways you could do that, because that history, by the way, at that point is a liability more than a help to you. So let's go look at an example. So I have that same wheel hub, and this one is parametric. You could see here that I have all of my sketches, I have my revolves, I have my extrudes, and everything that I showed you earlier to be able to make this. Well, one way to get rid of the history is to simply right-click at the very top and say, do not capture history. It will warn you that you're turning off history, and just say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Thank you for the warning, Fusion. Hit continue. Now it's going to turn the history off. It does create some things on the left-hand side that I will explain later. I'm going to skip that for now. And what I could do here is actually I could turn the history back on. So let's go do that. I'm going to go and turn the history back on. And now, just like I did with that imported file, I wind up with that base feature that has in it my actual geometry, like the final result, so to speak. So this is a really easy way to be able to clean up your history. If you have like this giant history and it's blowing up on you, turn the history off, turn the history back on, and now you're actually just have one base feature that has all your geometry in it and everything is like super clean. And now you can create new history from now on, just like with that imported file. So that's a great way to be able to take advantage of that base feature and using the history in the not history environment. But let's take that a little bit further, because that's what we do here. We try to take things as far as we can possibly take them. So let me undo a little bit of what I just did. So let's undo that. Here I have that history, but you'll notice that my timeline is actually scrolled or rolled back a little bit. There's some more stuff in here that I haven't shown you yet. So let's go and scroll to the very end. And now you'll see that I modeled up some extremely basic screws just for the purposes of this demonstration. It doesn't have to have all the detail. But you'll notice here that I have some ridiculously basic screws. And the way that I modeled them is not dependent on the part itself. So I have separate independent sketches and extrudes. You'll see all of them right here. That's everything that I had not shown you a few moments ago. Right? If I scroll back just a little bit to right here, no screws. To the very end, I have all those screws and the pattern. So let's say for a moment the history of the wheel hub itself is problematic. Like for some reason it keeps blowing up on me. And I want to get rid of the history of that model, but just that model. And the screws or some other components, I don't want to get rid of the history of those. Well, then you're kind of in an interesting predicament, right? Because if you just go to the very top left corner and you say don't capture the history and you hit continue, now I'm going to end up with the history-free environment. I go back to the history again, and now I have a base feature that has everything in it, but the screws are not editable at all, right? Because the whole thing is just a big base feature. So there's another way to go about things that I think you might like. And that way is to convert something into a base feature. So let's go and undo all of this, and I'll show you how to do that. Let's go back to the end. There we go. So you'll notice that if you right-click on things in the timeline itself, there's this icon here that says Convert to DM Feature. DM stands for Direct Modeling Feature, and basically that is a base feature. Base feature and direct modeling are kind of synonymous. They're the same thing. So what I'd say you should do in this particular case is find the very last feature for the wheel hub itself, which I believe would be this extrude here for the center shaft. Right click there and say convert to DM feature or direct modeling feature. And magic, what it just did was it took the entirety of that history for that particular model and turned it into a base feature. So what it actually did for me is turn the history off and then turn the history back on again. So I have exactly that same result with one exception, is that it doesn't have to apply to everything in the file. When you turn the history off and turn it back on, it's going to apply to everything in the file, whether it's one component or one body or 50 of all of the above, right? When you convert to DM feature or that base feature, it's actually doing it for a specific body. And the way you choose it is usually the very last feature for that object. So in this case, I have a base feature for the wheel hub itself. And if I hide the wheel hub for a second, you'll see I still have those screws and I still have all of the history for creating those screws. So I have the sketch, I have the extrude, the second extrude, the next sketch, the last extrude, and then the pattern of the bodies. So that's another really interesting way that you could use base features, right? I'm going to summarize for a second because that was a lot of stuff, right? So the first thing I showed you was, I explained the difference between history and no history. I also showed you how you can take a model that has no history and just turn it on, turn that history on, and how you can create new features in that history, and you could still go back to that base feature and make changes to it. I showed you the same thing using just a body, and I showed you the same thing using an assembly, which is just slightly more complex because it also has that hierarchy stuff in there too. I also showed you how you can convert multiple parametric features into a single base feature, right? So that's pretty cool too. And we're not done. We still have two more cool things I'm going to show you. So let's get to those two cool things. Now, some of you have probably already figured out that there are certain things that you just cannot do when the history is turned on. And I'll tell you why that is, and then I'll give you a couple of examples of some things you probably find that you can't exactly that I'm describing, that you can only do with the history turned off. So the reason that you can't do them unless the history is turned off is because they're just incompatible with the method or like the methodology of how parametric modeling works. They don't work together. So if you turn the history off, now you're in this direct modeling environment and you could do some things that you couldn't do otherwise. So let's give you an example. So if I have that wheel hub, let's go look at the imported one, and let's actually turn the history off for a moment. There we go. Now the history is off. Under modify, you'll see that there's a command here called edit face that does not exist with the history on. And again, the reason is because this is simply not a parametric feature. It just doesn't work in that environment. If I choose edit face, it lets me select a face that I'd like to edit. Like maybe it's the back face of this particular, this is not a very realistic example, I'll admit, but I think it still shows you what you guys want to see. It automatically converts that face into a T-spline. It lets me go and grab any of those edges of the edges, vertices, or faces of the T-spline, to be clear. And I can drag this anywhere I want, and I can twist things, and I could do all sorts of manipulations to it. And we'll go and grab this edge. We'll make this a little bit longer as well. And when I hit OK, it automatically is going to bring me back to the solid modeling, direct modeling environment. But what you'll notice is that this face is now actually not flat. It is that like super warped, funny surface that you saw a second ago. To be clear, if you wanted to do that with history, these are the steps you'd have to use. Let's actually undo that for a moment. With the history on, you would, let's actually turn that history back on. There we go. You would go to create a form, go to utilities and say convert, let's say a B-rep to a T-spline like this. Then you go to the edit form or edit face command. It is edit form, not edit face. I misspoke. So you go to the edit form command and you drag your faces however you want to drag them and manipulate that geometry. When you're done, you hit finish form. Now you have that surface, but it still hasn't affected the solid body. Then you could go to modify and say, I want to do a replace face command. You're going to replace this face with this surface. It's actually yelling. No, it's not. It is yelling at me because this face is a little too small. So let's actually go, I'll go and fix that real quick. So you do, whenever you're doing replace face command, there's a great little tip. Make the face you're using to replace with bigger than the object you're replacing, always. So let's go and grab this edge bigger. And just to be safe, I'll probably just make the whole thing, I'll actually select the whole thing and just double click to do that, by the way, and I'll scale it up. Try it again. So we're going to go back to modify. We're going to say replace this face, select that face. This is my target. There we go. That time it worked, of course. And then now I'm going to go back to the bodies here, and I'm going to remove that surface from my list. So right off the bat, that was like 6 steps or something like that. And if I just don't care about that history, then it is a lot faster to just say, you know what, let's turn that history off. Let's go and modify that face by editing it, and then choose whatever the modifier is going to be. So this is one example. There is another one I'll show you in a moment that I think you guys probably have seen in my reverse engineering video to take meshes and turn them into useful stuff. So let me give you that example, and then I'll show you another way to do all of this. That's why I'm showing you this. So here's the same wheel hub as a mesh. And let's go and see how many triangles I have in this mesh. That's the first thing I always like to do with meshes. And it looks like 16,000 triangles, which is less than 50,000. So I can actually convert this directly into a solid object. But if I try to do that in this history environment, I'm not going to find any kind of convert this mesh into a brep as an option. It's just not there, right? I have create mesh section sketch, but that's not the same thing as I want. So for what I want, I would have to go to turn the history off, hit OK. And now when I right click on that mesh, there's a new option here that says mesh to brep, and I can convert this mesh into a brep solid. Pretty cool. It's helpful, by the way. If you want to learn more about this, there is a mesh reverse engineering video that I've created a few months ago that I think you'd really like. But I'm going to show you an alternative to be able to do this without having to turn your history off, because there are plenty of occasions where you don't want to turn the history off. Maybe you're midway through designing an assembly and you inserted a mesh into the assembly and you want to convert that mesh into a solid, but you don't want to take the entire assembly and turn that to not have any history anymore. So there's another way to do it, and it's all based on base features. Exactly. So let's go back to the same file. Let's actually undo all of this. I'll just reopen that same file. Oh, that's the wrong one. That one's already open. There we go. Let's open the mesh file. So remember, the alternative to what I'm about to show you is to turn the history off and then convert from mesh to brep. But if you have a full history and you don't want to get rid of it, what you can actually do is say, I want to create a base feature. Now remember that the whole point of the base feature is that it's a hybrid between the history and the non-history environments. So you could do things in the base feature that you can't do with the history. So in this case, we'll go to modify. I have a mesh menu at the bottom that wouldn't be there in any other area. And I could say mesh to brep, select that mesh and hit OK. It'll give me the same warning on the number of triangles that I had. And when I hit OK, it's going to go and convert that into a solid. But in this case, I still have my history. So that's pretty darn cool. Another example would be the edit face. So if you want to go and edit face for an object, you can actually let's go back in there. So here I have my dumb imported model. Let's go and turn on the history here. All right, so I have a model, and no, we're not going to pretend there's a history. Let's go and grab the one that actually does have history. Let's close that and reopen it, and we'll give you a better example. We're all about doing things right rather than quick, so give me a moment here. Okay, so this is the parametric environment, right? It has the full history of my model. If I want, I can actually go and select the body itself, hit Control C on my keyboard to copy it. I can create a new base feature. I can paste my body into that base feature, and then I can go and use that edit face command that I couldn't use otherwise because you can't use it in the parametric environment. So that's yet another way you can use base features to access normally inaccessible features or commands. It's a great way to do it. Now, there's only one other method that I like to use base features for, and it's actually very similar to what I just showed you. So it's a great segue. Let's say for a moment that I download a model, whether it's from McMasterCard or my vendor or my customer, and it has all that hierarchy stuff in it, and it's like really complex. Let's go and look at that. So this is the front wheel assembly. And you'll see here that it has all this hierarchy in it. And maybe I want to get rid of the hierarchy because I just don't care about the hierarchy. It's true. Sometimes I don't care about it. I'm just using it as like a tool. Maybe I want to combine all these bodies together so I could do a combined cut with something else. Or maybe I want to do a combined, join with something else. There are any number of reasons I might want to join all these different bodies together. And in that case, the hierarchy just doesn't matter at all. So here's two ways you could do that. One is you could turn the history of the model off. It'll give you that warning just like before. And then one by one, I can go and find those bodies that I want, and I could drag them to the top level or root level of my file. And I could do that over and over and over again. And I have the feeling you would understand that this is going to take me a long time. That's like a long, long time. But I can do it, which is helpful. Once I get rid of the body from the hierarchy, from that component, I can select the component and I could just hit delete and get rid of it. So I could go do that one by one, but I think you guys have the feeling that this is going to kind of take me forever. So here's another alternative that Base Features really does a good job of helping with. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And I'm going to use my selection filter. And I don't know if you guys actually use the selection filter, but you should. So I want to show you what these options are. You can choose to select only bodies, only faces, only vertices, or a couple of those at a time. And the select through checkbox, that one's really great. So I usually have that on, just so you know. I'm going to uncheck the select all, and I'm going to check just the bodies. And that means now that I cannot select sketches. I cannot select axes. I cannot select construction planes. I can only select bodies. Now I'm going to go and zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to use my window selection to select everything that's inside of this particular file. I'm going to hit Control C on my keyboard. I'm on a PC, but if I were on a Mac, which of course Fusion works on, I would use Command C for copy. Now I'm going to go and open up a new design here real quick, and I'm going to go and say create a base feature, just like we did a few moments ago. And if you haven't guessed it yet, I'm going to go and hit paste or Control V. And what it's actually going to do is it's going to go and paste all of the bodies into this base feature, and it's the bodies themselves. It's not the hierarchy or the components or the faces or the edges or the sketches. It's just the bodies. Now I don't see them for some reason, so let's go and maybe I'll do the zoom to fit. There we go. I, by the way, double clicked the middle mouse button on my mouse, right? That actually automatically zooms to whatever is in your design. And now I could see all of my bodies. And I have this giant folder of all my bodies. This would include surfaces just as much as it would include solids, by the way. But I have all these bodies all just in one folder. And now my life is so much easier. Right now, all I have to do is hit Finish Base Feature. And now I have this as like a single object. It's still multiple bodies at the moment, but I can use this for a whole bunch of things if I don't care about the hierarchy. And if I also just want it all to be one body, well, I could use the combine command after the base feature, or if I just really don't care about that history, I could always go back again to that base feature and hit edit. I can go to the combine command and I could select this as my target, and I can go and select all those other bodies as my tool bodies, and I can go, I should just window select this for the record, but once you hit the OK button, it's going to go and join everything together, and you'll have, in theory, one body. So let's actually go and do that. Let's go and I'll pick, this one's going to be our target, so let's go and do combine. I'll pick body one. Then for my tool, I'm actually going to hide body one for a second. I'll go and select everything besides body one. This will take a moment because there are a lot of bodies there. And I'm going to go and say OK. Now it disappeared from my screen because I hid body one to select everything else. So let's actually go and show that again. Voila. Now I have a single body that has absolutely everything in it. And now I could say Finish Base Feature, and I could use this for anything I want. Now remember that the examples I showed you today, those just happen to be examples that I'm picking. Really, the key here is that this technique can serve you very well in a whole variety of different ways. So let's actually go and summarize for a second. So Base features are a bridge between parametric modeling with your history and direct editing or direct modeling without any history. And there are a variety of different ways you can use it. You can bring in imported geometry and turn history on, and you'll still have a base feature that you could go and edit. So you have the ability with those objects to be able to create new features with the history or not. The same thing is also true with your assemblies. You also have the ability to combine multiple parametric features into that already exist, that you've already created, or someone else already created, into a base feature, and have that not affect any of your other components as well. So that's really helpful. You can also use base features to be able to access somewhat locked or somewhat hidden features that are only available without that history in the direct editing mode only. So the two examples that I showed you are the edit face command, edit form, I believe is what it was called, the edit form command, and also the convert from mesh to brep. I use the mesh to brep one a lot, by the way. So look at that one in more detail again. And I also lastly showed you how you can use the history-free mode or the direct modeling mode to clean up your hierarchy. But if you actually want to do it even faster, select all those bodies, hit Control-C, create a new document, or even just a new base feature in your existing document would work as well. And you can paste those in there. Credit, by the way, for that particular technique goes to Kevin Schneider. If you guys have never heard that name, Kevin is one of the founding fathers of Fusion 360. He's known at Autodesk as the godfather of Fusion 360, and he showed me that technique just a couple of years ago. So credit to him. Thank you, Kevin, for that cool tip. I hope you've all enjoyed learning about base features today. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to let us know in the comment section. Please feel free to like this video and also tell all your friends. We have a lot more content coming. It is our absolute pleasure to deliver that to you so that you can learn how to use our software and make some incredible things. All right, don't forget, with Fusion 360, you can make anything. Thank you so much for your time today.